Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, The Ins and Outs of Direct Filing Customs Entries, presented by the United States Fashion Industry Association's associate member company, CustomsNow. This is our first webinar with CustomsNow, and we're really excited to add them to our mix of presenters. Our speakers today will be Karen Smith, CEO of CustomsNow, and Nick Adams, Vice President of Client Services. Now I'll let you, Karen, if you want to take over from here.
All right, thank you, Jana. All right, okay, thank you, Jana, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. So I'd like to start off by thanking you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend our webinar today on direct filing. We really do appreciate it. So we're going to start out with introductions. Again, I'm Karen Smith, and I'm a licensed broker, and I have over 25 years of international trade, customs compliance, and direct filing experience. I started out the early part of my career in a freight forwarding capacity before moving on to brokerage, and then eventually moving on to the importer side with 2 large retailers. So probably most notably, I helped design, develop, and implement a best-in-class direct filing program at Target Corporation in the early 2000s. And then for the last 15 years, I've been working specifically with direct filing in various capacities. As Jana mentioned, I am currently the CEO of CustomsNow. We're a customs-approved, ACE-certified ABI vendor and a licensed broker. I'm an active member of the US Fashion Industry Association, as well as AAEI, ICPA, and Women in International Trade. And joining me today is Nick Adams.
Hello everyone, my name is Nick Adams. I'm the VP of Client Services with CustomsNow. Like Karen, I've been in the international trade business for over 25 years. Most of that time was spent with 2 self-filing importers where I managed the international finance, transportation, and compliance departments. I'm a member of CBP's ACE Trade Support Network and serve on the Entry Committee. I also spent several years on AEEI's Regulated Industry Committee, which dealt with other government agencies.
Okay, so I'd like to take just a minute to talk about what our goals are for today. So whether direct filing is something that you really have not considered before, or if it's something that you've been intrigued about for a long time, we hope that by the end of this webinar, we're able to give you a solid understanding of the ins and outs of direct filing. So really, we're first going to talk about what do we really mean by direct filing. Then we'll take a look at the evolution of our industry in respect to customs, importers' responsibilities, and some of the events which have helped to shape today's compliance departments. And we'll also take a look at who were some of the early innovators or early adopters. And then we're going to really get into it. Why should you consider direct filing? What are some of the modern day myths surrounding direct filing? We'll talk through the requirements, which is really important, and I think people really want to get their heads around what is required. We'll get into the benefits of direct filing, and we'll certainly get into the challenges that one must consider when thinking about direct filing. And then, as Jana said, we'll wrap it up at the end with Q&A. Okay, so to start off, what is direct filing? Simply put, we're going to start at 50,000 feet here. Direct filing or self-filing is the process by which U.S. importers file their import entries directly with Customs on their own behalf. These filings don't have to just be customs entries. They can be importer security filings, reconciliation entries, the new post-summary corrections, and a whole lot more. So the filing itself is transmitted to Customs via an automated broker interface or an ABI software vendor that must be approved by Customs. And once that data is transmitted through an ABI system, it's processed internally by Customs either in their aging ACS system or their new soon-to-be mandatory ACE environment. So direct filing, just a couple of points here at the beginning about direct filing. It's not for everyone. Importers do need to be sophisticated. They do need to have a good compliance team in place, and we're going to take you through a lot of those considerations today. It takes a very well thought out plan, and it takes considerations of your import supply chain and more. That being said, it is a growing trend, and it really can be a progressive and innovative way for the right company to manage what can be a complex matter. So these next couple of slides, Nick's going to take us through how compliance has progressed over time.
Okay, well, like I say, I've been at this for quite a while, so this is kind of a history lesson for anybody that is fairly new to this industry. But In the last few decades, there's been a significant change to the way in which customs administers the importation of goods into the U.S. I'd say it started in the 80s with customs rolling out the ABI system to automate the collection of import information and provide immediate feedback to the filer. The concept of paperless entries was introduced, and filers benefited from reduced courier fees to and from the local customs house. Then in 1993, the Customs Modernization and Informed Compliance Act, or MOD Act, was enacted, and the relationship between importers and customs was fundamentally altered. Previously, importers relied heavily on their brokers for the preparation and submission of their entries. However, the hallmark of the new law was informed compliance, which shifted to the importer the legal responsibility for declaring the correct value, classification, rate of duty to merchandise entering the United States using reasonable care. In order to comply with the law, many companies immediately began hiring compliance managers and setting up compliance teams. They took control over the HTS determination, special trade program eligibility, valuation, and much, much more. Finally, who can forget January 1st, 2005, when textile quotas were eliminated? Now you can have a truly paperless situation and entry process, even for textiles. And then more recently, with the advent of ACE, there's even some, there continues to be some really neat programs coming out of customs that are helping to make the entry process more efficient and easier to do. For example, remote location filing and electronic invoice processing was rolled out by customs. This allowed for an even more paperless import process. Documents are no longer hand-delivered to local ports. Rather, they are transmitted electronically. This allows for quicker processing and a more efficient process. So the neat thing about RLF is you can be sitting anywhere in the United States and clear a shipment at any major U.S. port in the U.S. You don't have to physically be within the port. With U.S. Customs Automated Clearinghouse Program and periodic monthly statements, the duty payment process is reduced to one payment per month for those entries that cleared the prior month. With the advent of CBP's Centers of Excellence and Expertise, import specialists are being centralized across the nation. Importers will enjoy less CF-28s from their various ports of entry, and this will reduce the need to develop relationships with the individual import specialists in the ports. The Apparel, Footwear, and Textile CEE opened in San Francisco this past June 3rd. With ACE, an entry filer can now make systematic corrections to an entry up to 270 days after the release date. Gone are the days of the manual post-entry amendments for significant changes. So again, today you have 10 days essentially from the release date to make an electronic correction. And if you don't catch the issue until after that, you have to send in a PEA. Finally, if your imports are regulated by an OGA or other government agency, you'll be happy to hear that the International Trade Data System will eventually be the central conduit for communicating with your agencies. Again, greater uniformity, and this should lead to better visibility to OGA holds. So, some of the early adopters were food importers, and that's because they had very large shipments that were quite simple in nature. They often they would have the whole vessel's worth of cargo, and with just one or two HTS numbers. Other early adopters were the automotive industry. They were at the forefront of developing parts files, which they used to capture all their SKU information and the corresponding tariff information and other attributes required at entry. They were, what appealed to them mostly, I think, was the control. Finally, other importers are attracted to the savings by filing their entries directly. It's still in its infancy, self-filing, as Karen mentioned. About 95% of the entries are still filed by brokers, but we see with the modernization of efforts going on with customs, as well as the increased onus on importers to control their compliance, that this is a burgeoning field, and we're getting a lot more interest. When we go to trade shows, it's no longer, I would never do that. It's like, yep, we're aware of that, we're thinking about doing it, and we just got to get the priorities set.
Okay, so the question is why direct file? Nick gave us a great look at the evolution of the industry and a lot of the technology advancements with customs. So let's take a close look at today's compliance departments. So today, many importers already perform a majority of the import process. So they classify their items, they probably provide some kind of electronic data to their brokers or 3PLs, and of course they by nature have developed more of a direct relationship with customs and some of the government agencies, either at the local ports or through their account managers, or certainly soon through the centers of excellence, which are now expanding. Also, when things get ugly, such as exams, holds, the CF-28s, 29s, you know, the importer's involved. They can't help but be involved. They are. I can't see any of you, but I'm thinking you might be nodding your heads right now. Then as far as duty payments, with Nick mentioned, many importers have already realized that there's some really good benefits that come along with paying your duties directly with customs. We're going to get into that a little bit more and how that impacts direct filing in some later slides. Additionally, importers may already arrange the delivery, pay their own freight, and submit the OBLs. And hopefully they already audit some of their entries or all of their entries. So the reality is that for some importers, assuming some of those responsibilities that the broker takes care of now is really not that much of a stretch. So this next part of the presentation, we're going to move on to the benefits. So many first point to the savings aspect, but that's not really what us compliance professionals care the most about, right? What do we care about? We care about compliance, but with a direct approach like we're talking about today with direct filing, there's a lot of great things that can happen in terms of compliance. So it's not really all about the money, and we're going to talk about some of these benefits right now. Okay, so like I mentioned, compliance, right? We all know that use of a broker today does not remove the liability for the importer. So importers are still liable for the accuracy of their customs filings. And ultimately, importers are the most knowledgeable about their items and their products, and they know their potential compliance concerns, so they're in a good position to address these issues head-on. One core compliance team is highly trained, sitting at the importer, managing the entry process, and they know, they know what to look for. They know what their concerns are and what they need to focus on. So some of the things that can improve compliance when direct filing. Just by nature of direct filing, the entries are reviewed prior to filing the transaction with customs. So price discrepancies, material content changes, all those last-minute changes to a product that never happen, but they do. They have a better chance of being caught prior to the entry submission when it's the importer looking at the documents and when it's the importer filing it. And the big piece to this puzzle that we're going to spend a lot of time on is automation and the data that you have today. So how we can use the automation that you have and the data that you have internally to make the filing process very smooth and automated. This reduces manual steps, which reduces errors, which improves the compliance. And then just one last note, by filing your entries directly, importers have direct access to all that entry data. So they can pull it back into their system. They can use it for post-entry audits or future analysis. Okay, the other benefits we're going to talk about, visibility and control. So direct filers, we like to say they gain control. How do they gain control? Well, they've got immediate access to the current state of their import shipments. So that can tend to be a black hole. No matter what kind of visibility an importer has with their entire supply chain, the customs piece is difficult to track. It always has been. And it's difficult to report on, and it can be seen as a black hole. But with direct filing, importers will now gain access to things like AMS queries. That can be used to verify clearance, shipment availability, and avoid transportation delays. You'll see customs holds, both compliance and security related. FDA holds, even USDA holds, all those things are visible to you as soon as the entry is transmitted. So for certain types of holds, direct filers are in a better position to ensure that the agency now has the information necessary to make an admissibility decision and remove the hold. So in addition to some of these benefits, Just by having an ABI system, there's a lot of other visibility that comes with it. So you'll have the ability to query things like liquidation status, FDA data, dumping orders, dumping cases, and a lot more. You'll also have access to the live tariff. The live tariff includes OGA requirements, items that are flagged for Lacey Act, and even special program indicators. So you'll have all of those things at your fingertips. One other thing to point out with direct filing, we see that the importer's supply chain department, they have the ability to be much more fluid, make transportation changes without a major impact to the brokerage operation, because the brokerage operation is now sitting separate from the transportation piece. Okay, so I would be fooling you if I said it's not about the money. It is about the money as well, because really there's a potential for tremendous savings with direct filing. So depending on the type of ABI system you select and its pricing, importers can see a savings of up to 90% off third-party provider fees. That's typically an estimated $100,000 per 1,000 entries. Of course, that's based on an average cost of $100 per entry. But in addition to that, there's extra fees that are eliminated. So certain fees like additional invoices, line items, FDA filings, things like that, they go away. So for the importer whose shipments contain multi-invoices, multi-lines, this can make the savings really even greater. Okay, so there's savings, but what can you do? What does the savings do for you? Well, hopefully the days of a compliance department being considered a necessary evil are long gone. But the reality is that these kinds of savings can bring a former back office importing function front office status. So these kind of savings can fund an import compliance department's growth. It can provide additional staffing. It can fund special compliance projects that you want to get to and you just never quite get there. And all of this can happen while it directly impacts in a positive way landed costs and the bottom line of your products. So there's not too many departments in a company today that have these kinds of opportunities. So in addition to the dollars saved and the compliance, control, and visibility, there's a couple of other soft benefits that importers can get from direct filing. Okay, so this slide is just some additional benefits that importers realize sometimes after implementation. So direct filers start to see that they have tighter vendor control. You know, vendor documents are reviewed by the importer at the time of entry, and direct feedback to the vendor tends to have a lot more impact when it's coming directly from the importer. Things such as bad descriptions, missing information, they often get cleaned up much more quickly than they would without the importer being involved. We see this all the time, and we lived it when we worked for importers directly as well. Direct filers tend to develop a closer relationship with their internal stakeholders. So they seem to work closer with finance departments. They're working with ACH payments or payments for exams or transportation, things like that. Receiving, they seem to get notified if there quantities, shortages, things like that. So all of these things are critical to a compliance department, really, being a central place that interacts with all those different parts of your company. And if you can build that and build visibility to your compliance group, that's always a good thing. And then the last point here is that the entry processing role itself, the entry filing, it's typically more of an entry-level position, and we're going to talk about the automation that goes along with that and staffing. But because of that, it can really be used as a springboard to help build a foundation of compliance professionals within a company. So now that we've covered benefits, Nick's going to take us through what it looks like to get started.
Okay, first I'll cover the customs requirements, which are pretty straightforward. Then we'll touch on some of the myths that surround direct filing and look at some of the considerations before beginning a self-direct filing program. On the myths, on the requirement side, to become a self-filer, you'll need a continuous bond, which I assume most of you already have. You also need the ability to pay your duties directly to Customs via ACH if you're not doing that today. If you're not doing that today, you really should consider doing this, even if you're not direct filing. By taking on this process, you are protecting your company from potential late payment penalties and, in the event your broker were to file for bankruptcy, potential duplicate payments of the duties. You want to work with your finance and accounting departments to determine how this process will best work within your organization. We strongly favor ACH debit because the onus is on Customs to debit your account for the correct amount. And by the way, I've never seen Customs take the incorrect. It seems to be much easier for importers to set up ACH debit versus ACH credit. Finance departments, however, are leery to allow an outside organization to debit one of their bank accounts. However, by working with your bank, you can restrict the debitor to U.S. Customs only. If you sign up for PMS, there will be only there will only be 12 payments per year, 1 per month, and that should be very attractive to both the finance and accounting folks. So if you're not paying your duties directly to Customs now, you might want to start looking into that and just running it by the finance and accounting areas to see if there are any major concerns. Next, you'll need a filer code, which is assigned by Customs. Filer codes are assigned by the broker management office at headquarters after the importer makes their initial request at their local port. It takes about 4 weeks. However, if an importer already has a filer code for drawback purposes, that can be used for normal entry processing as well. Once you receive your filer code, you'll want to send an ABI letter of intent form to the Office of Information Technology at HQ. Once received, CBP will assign an ABI client rep to the importer, who becomes the importer's technical contact at Customs for all matters relating to entry transmissions. That takes about 10 days. Finally, the client rep will set up the importer up in their system and set their profile to test mode, and typically require a limited number, between 5 and 10 test entries and invoices prior to going live. And more that testing is quite easy. They just have you duplicate maybe 5 or 10 entries of your entries from maybe the previous month. So what are some of the myths surrounding direct filing? Myth number 1, the importer must employ an individual that received or has a customs broker's license. This is not true. While it may be beneficial to have someone with this level of expertise, it's not required. That's documented in 19 CFR 111.2. Myth number 2, self-filers can only file basic entries. Actually, importers can file any and all entries, including consumption entries, complicated ones if you will, NAFTA, CBTBA, ADD entries, foreign trade zone entries, as well as border and courier. Now, whether you want to file all those complex entries is another question. Myth number 3, self-filing can lead to increased CBP scrutiny. We've never seen this happen, but we've heard a couple people voice that concern, that by filing their entries directly, maybe that would trigger an audit or something. We've just never seen anything of that nature. In fact, what we see is direct filers, their very first entries are basically treated exactly as they've always been treated. In other words, if a particular entry always goes paperless, it continues to go paperless on the very first entry that they submit. We believe that Customs cargo selectivity processing, or targeting, is really based more on the IOR, the HTS, the MID, all those major points within the entry. And only when those things change radically will you maybe get an exam or a request for documents. Myth number 4, self-filing is an all-or-nothing proposition. Not true. Self-filers can take on as much or as little as they choose. Many self-filers start with their ISFs, since they are pretty straightforward. Later, they take on entries from a trusted vendor in a fairly simple entry process. They continue rolling out more entries as they feel comfortable, and many continue to use their brokers for the more problematic shipments. So let's talk about the rollout considerations a bit more. You want to assess your import supply chain to develop a simple and logical rollout schedule. Determining factors may include current paperless rates, the origin of the goods, the complexity of the entries, your relationship with the vendor and the quality of their documentation, the mode of transportation and transit times. You'll also want to consider what services your broker performs for you today and what you'll need to perform once you start self-filing. Some examples include paying the duty and/or freight on your own behalf, issuing delivery orders to domestic carriers, providing shipment status messages to a shipment tracking system, providing reports used by your accounting and compliance departments. Once you've decided on a rollout schedule, be sure to look at your purchase order language as well as any payment instructions you have for your vendors. Specifically, ensure they are flexible to allow the notified party on the bills of lading to read either your broker or yourselves. Work with your vendors and or forwarders to ensure they understand exactly when they should start sending their documents directly to you versus your traditional broker. All right, so the entry process itself has, again, evolved quite a bit over the years, and we are very big on leveraging existing data to make the process more efficient and more compliant. And really, almost everyone now sends their broker a parts file, if you will, to capture all of your import product information. That includes the tariff numbers that apply to the product, the country of origin, any special program indicators, and the MID to be used. Additionally, many systems can accommodate dual source products, so if you buy a specific style from, say, China, as well as Egypt, the item would be listed twice in the database with the specific attributes tied to the correct instance of the product. Having a complete and accurate style file is the foundation for a compliant program and allows for the efficient and accurate processing of entries. If your system does not have a home, quote unquote, for all the information needed at the time of entry, you may want to consider using an ABI system solely for that purpose initially. Now, if you want to be super efficient and allow your entry writers even more time for reviewing the entry and less time keying, you want to leverage some type of a shipment file to populate the line information on the entry. One example is an automated shipment notice, or ASN, traditionally known as an EDI 856. Many importers receive an ASN currently from their consolidators, forwarders, or vendors, so they have visibility to what products have shipped and can plan their receiving. The ASN is a great source for entry information, and it typically provides the BL numbers, the PO numbers, and the items that have shipped and the quantity of items that have shipped. The only thing missing from an ASN is the item cost. And if it's possible, if you can get the cost from the purchase order and include it in the ASN, then you really have a great file to help populate the entries. So the whole idea is that the parts file and then the ASN come together and create 95% of the entry. And again, it allows more time for the entry writer to look at the data, look at the invoice, maybe go double check that tariff number, pull up the online tariff schedule, and just looking for things that just seem, like Karen alluded to, sometimes buyers make last minute changes to a product and it's not always communicated to the customs team.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to staffing. And staffing, that's the one thing it's difficult to get your head around. However, with automation possibilities that we just discussed, or even if you have a supply chain that we call vanilla and limited data, the number of staff required may surprise you. So initially, it's really important to evaluate your current staff and the competencies and how their time is spent today. So how much time do they spend today on broker oversight, on problem resolution, manual audits? So with direct filing, some of this time can be repurposed. This model here shows a sampling of roles and staff required for an importer with a fairly high degree of automation, as Nick just mentioned. So for example, with 10,000 entries, 1 to 2 full-time employees can manage that process with a pretty automated process. What we see is that most average-size importers, they generally have a sufficient staff to implement the initial direct filing process. And that is, pick 1 or 2 lane segments, roll it out, prove the concept, and then as the program generates savings, it can be expanded and additional staffing can be added. Okay, so we're almost there. The one last consideration is software. Okay, so let's talk about the things to consider when selecting an ABI provider. So there's several types of ABI software available. First and foremost, you need to determine what type of software will work best for you. The options can really be grouped into 2 categories: a client install or off-the-shelf program, or a hosted solution or a software as a service model. So in the early days, when we looked at some of those early adopters, the only option was a client install model. So these importers were fully committed to direct filing, right? They purchased a system, they bought servers, They set up a direct connection with Customs, and then they had to have the IT staff that maintained it. So just as compliance groups have advanced, so has the technology. And now there are other options, as I mentioned, web-based, software-as-a-service, hosted solutions. And this is really what's changed and opened up direct filing to a larger group of people. Okay, so for example, now with the software-as-a-service model, users will pay a one-time license fee, and then they'll pay a per transaction price after that. They don't have to manage servers or the connection to Customs or worry about the updates to the software. That's all done on the vendor's end. So hosted solution can be highly secure delivery method. Again, there's no additional hardware, no updates or maintenance fees. That's handled by the vendor. And it's a low cost to implement. You're not involving, it's not a major IT project involving IT staff and bolting it on the internal system. More so, it facilitates integration with your internal systems and facilitates automation. So it's more of a passing files back and forth. Passing files, parts files to your brokers or your 3PLs or purchase orders to your consolidators. It's like that. So you can pass your data files in and out pretty quickly and pretty easily these days. So Customs, on their website, they have a published list of approved ABI software providers. Some things to consider when you're looking at them, you know, what kind of functionality do they have? Do they make sure they're ACE certified? The deadlines for ACE are coming up soon. And look at the pricing and as well the support. So not just technology support, but compliance and process support as well. And then last, you know, talk to people who direct file. Get referrals. Referrals are big. We just came from a conference in Orlando last week, and we met with about 4 of the early adopters. You know, not our clients, but they love to tell their story. They love to talk about the benefits that they didn't think they were going to get, and they were kind of surprised once they started rolling it out. So I'd really always encourage people to go talk to people who have already done it. All right, so in conclusion, you know, direct filing, it can provide a significant cost savings, but in addition to that, control, visibility, all those things are improved. And it's not that difficult. And I think a key point is it can be implemented partially. It's not all or nothing. But doing so can certainly mitigate risk and hopefully reduce any of the post-entry work that you might be seeing today. It can definitely elevate the compliance's role in the supply chain within the company. And with some automation, it can be very efficient and a very great process in-house. Okay, so in closing, I'd just like to thank the fashion industry for allowing us to participate in this webinar, and thank you all for attending. I hope we provided you with a fresh perspective and some valuable insight regarding the ins and outs of direct filing. Now, I believe that Jana has been assisting us in collecting questions from the group. So
if anybody has questions that you haven't asked yet, you can use the question box on your little panel to the right of your screen or the chat box. So if anybody has any questions, write those in now. We have one. I don't know if this goes to Karen or Nick, but I already have a filer code for drawback. Can I use it to file entries?
Sure, I'll take that. Yeah, a drawback is considered a type of entry with Customs. So when you were issued that filer code for drawback, that is already approved for processing any kind of import entries. So you're fine with that. The next step you would just have to do is submit a letter of intent to Customs. That's the technology piece. So they get you set up with an ABI rep.
All right. We have another question. Who takes care of the additional steps when a customs or other exam is required?
I can take that. That will be handled by the importer, and so you'll want to understand the ports that you come into. Familiarize yourself with the customs examination sites in those ports, the CESs. Give them a call and tell them that you could potentially have an exam in their port, and you just want to understand what the process is. You really don't want them to hold your cargo pending the receipt of a check, so usually they'll accept a letter of guarantee. So get all that all straightened out ahead of time so that if and when you have an exam, you're familiar with that process.
Okay, and I have a new one here. What is the difference of being a direct filer for an FTZ? Are there any negatives of doing direct filing with an FTZ?
I would say it's just kind of a different process with FTZs. The majority of entries that are regular entries are basically you submit the entry summary and you certify. So it's a one-step process. FTZs are a two-step process, and the entry is really the 3461, which is your weekly estimate of what will come out of the zone if you're on weekly withdrawals. And then your 7501 covers everything that came out that prior week. So it's very, very similar. They're just a lot larger typically, and it is the two-step process.
And two, I'll just add that with the automation piece that we talked about, most FTZ softwares can kick out a file, that 7501 file, which can be, pulled in to create all the line items. So, you can build it. The good thing is you can build a pretty automated process with that FTZ software.
Our company has been through an SA, and management is afraid of that occurring again. I have worked for the direct filers before and know the benefits. Can you recommend a way to ease their fears of direct filing? Also, can you present any, is there any way to use the presentation for my plan to them, or use your help for them?
So your company's been through a
absolutely.
focused assessment, and you're interested in direct filing. You just need to assuage management's fears. We can certainly help with that if you would like, or provide you with more material. But again, as we said earlier in the presentation, we've never seen by direct filing that increased the scrutiny of customs. In fact, we've heard from customs officials in the past, anecdotally, that they actually view a self-filing importer as being maybe even that much more knowledgeable and that much more in control of their compliance. Karen?
No, just what you said, Nick, as well, and I would just encourage you to, use maybe informative things like this, and go back to the regulations too. You're liable. So the more hands-on you are, the better you are, and by doing some of this direct, you're going to see a lot of control benefits, and you're going to hopefully take care of issues before they happen at entry, and so you'll be ahead of the game.
Okay, and how do you handle documents required?
So we very much promote remote location filing. Most importers, larger importers, come into multiple ports of entry, and so RLF is really the best way to handle that. Again, you can be sitting anywhere in the country and clear shipments at any major U.S. port of entry. So with RLF, if an entry doesn't go paperless, the response from ABI is electronic invoice required. And what that means is they want you to send the data elements on the invoice, which really have already been entered into the application as part of the entry process. So you're sending, you're not sending an image copy of the invoice, you're sending information like the header on the invoice. There's a screen within our application where you can say the terms and the FOB points and things of that nature. But the guts of it is the invoice, and that's your product number, the quantity that's shipped, the value, and the description. And that's another nice thing about RLF is you can control the description that goes to customs. As long as your description is as good as the one on the invoice, that's great. If it's better, you can augment it with more information. For instance, if you have a wearing apparel detail sheet, you can send that information electronically to customs.
Okay, and how do I roll out a direct filing program?
Well, kind of like we talked about, I guess the first thing is get management buy-in and understand all the benefits that accrue, and then go through those steps of getting up and running with customs. But then you just want to take a step back and say, where does it make logical sense for me to start? Personally, I would vote for an ocean shipment because your transit times are so long and you have plenty of time to get the documents, look them over, get all the data ready, and transmit to customs. So I am attracted to ocean, and then a fairly simple entry type. Just to start with, you know, typo 1, regular consumption entry, not a whole lot of special trade programs and things of that nature. You know, just really try to pick off a vanilla entry or two and get those out of the way first, and then start to delve into the more complex entries.
Okay, and does a company need a consultant to apply for direct filing with the CBP?
No, they don't. They, again, as the importer has the ability to and the right to make entry. So it's just, there are some guidelines out on Customs website about the requirements. It's a letter requesting a filer code. So no, they can do that on their own. But once they get to the point where they need to submit a letter of intent and get that Customs contact assigned from a systematic perspective, they do need to be they need to have purchased or set up a relationship already with an ABI vendor, because that vendor's information gets plugged into the filer code from the importer.
Okay, and one last one, I guess. Our company pays their duties on PMS. Can I do this with direct file?
Yes, certainly. It's just a matter of the setup. For instance, if you're on ACH debit PMS, we would need your payer unit number, which we would plug into your profile. So short answer is yes, very much so.
All right, and unless there's any more questions from the audience, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Oops, it looks like we have one more. Do you need permits, or do we need permits?
No, permits are a broker thing. And they are permitted to operate within certain ports, and then they usually get a national permit these days so that they can file remotely across the nation. But for an importer, you don't need a permit.
All right, well, thank you, Nick and Karen, and thank everybody for attending our webinar today. You can visit our events website for more information, and have a great remainder of the day. Nick and Karen, do you have any final words or comments?
No, just thank you, Jana, and thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate it.